My name is Mary Reed Sheffer, and I'm the Director of Employment Services at Edge Employment in Louisville, Kentucky, and the Chair of the Employer Education and Engagement Committee of the Employment First Council. On behalf of the Kentucky Employment First Council, I'd like to welcome you to Part 3, the final part of Enhancing Employer Engagement. This webinar series is a collaboration between Kentucky Employment First and the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. ODEP is supporting Kentucky's Employment First work through their multi-year National Expansion of Employment Networks, or NEON, initiative, launched in 2019 with project management support provided by EconSys. Our presenter, Steve Blanks, is a subject matter expert with the NEON initiative. Steve is also the Director of Partnerships at a Maryland-based CRP called SEEK. We will be offering certificates showing hours of training at the end of each webinar. We put a link to an evaluation in the chat box at the end of the presentation. Once you complete this evaluation and some action questions in response to the content, you will be provided a certificate. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Steve. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. And my gosh, I'm sad. This is our last time together. Probably for most of you, you're not sad at all, but for me, I will miss you guys and hope that this last session kind of rounds out our sessions for the summer and hopefully projects you forward into this kind of fiscal year. So as I put into the chat, I had a great summer. Just recently was out in Europe. So put in your fun things that you've been doing, even if it's a staycation or something intriguing that you did. We want to use the chat. That's how we kind of interact with each other. We will have a breakout later in the session too, but use the chat. Get questions in here as I go through. If there's things that you don't make sense or things that don't understand, just throw it in the chat. One of the co-hosts will kind of ping me and stop me, and we'll try to address those. But let me share my screen here. And let's get thumbs up from everybody that you can see that. Excellent. Okay, let's get rolling. So as I've done in the past, I wanted to kind of, as we've done with the survey that went out, there were some things that you had to do. There's some actions that we want to take. You know, getting all of this training is fantastic. It's awesome. You get your CEUs, you get your credits, all of that good stuff. But if you don't do anything with it, what's the point, right? What's the point of any of this stuff? So in the last kind of survey, there was a number of things that we kind of asked people to kind of think about doing. And as you can see, we got a whole range of people's responses here. I do want, again, people in the chat that if you did respond, if you picked one of these ideas, setting up a tour with a business, developing a list of rapport and info gathering questions, kind of remembering we talked about curiosity a lot. That's very crucial to kind of this whole process. If there was something that you did since we met last month, please put in the chat. How did it go? Did it go well? Was it an utter failure? Did you learn from it? Did a job come out of it? You know, hopefully that's kind of where we're going with all of these steps and processes. And if there's something that you've got feedback or insights through using some of these techniques, please put them in the chat. I'm intrigued specifically about anyone who did ask for a testimonial. That is sometimes something that we tend to forget doing with people. And when we start talking to employers, and the retain webinars, you know, it's employers talking to employers. So they're talking about testimonials all the time. And I don't know, did anyone, again, put in the chat if they'd asked for a testimonial and they got flat out rejected? Or if somebody said, yeah, hell, I'll give you a whole thing. And they give you like a 20-minute video with all of the snippets. So put that in the chat. Keep up all of these practices. So the idea of developing lists of questions is like, oh, why am I developing lists of questions? It's about practice, right? If we keep having this reference guide of kind of how to build rapport with people or get information behind the scenes, get into the habit of kind of doing this such it becomes second nature. So keep working on these activities and exercises as we go forward. So as again, what I want to try to do is recap. It's been a month since we've met and remind ourselves kind of through the two sessions around connecting and consideration, where are we at? So reminder, We're workforce development professionals, right? We're not disability professionals. We're workforce development professionals when we're facing the employers. And what do? We work in consultative sales. So we're about trying to figure out what it is that employer has, what does that employer need, understanding things from their perspective, and doing more listening than talking, and really understanding there. We're trying to provide custom staffing solutions, right? So instead of just filling jobs or putting placements, we're about staffing solutions for that employer. And it may be as simple as filling a job they already have with the right match, with a good qualified individual, but it may also be more nuanced than that. And really, again, based on listening to what they want and need and taking their perspective, you might be able to do more than just fill a position. You might be able to add value, which is again the thing that we talked about. We're trying to understand those business practices so we can add value to not only filling a position, but also maybe bring them more revenue, reduce their costs, reorganize their resources so higher cost people are doing less lower cost work. So again, kind of thinking about that adding value as workforce development professionals. We spent a lot of time last month about curiosity. I told you I'm a curiosity nerd. I still am. I ask lots of questions, um, to the point of being nosy, but always trying to remember that don't go too far. And if you remember from Scott Shigioka, the gentleman who wrote a book and we heard the video from, that curiosity has to be kind of earned, right? We get the superficial curiosity when we go networking with people, and it's like, what's your name? Where do you work? What do you do? You earn through building rapport. You earn that trust and that relationship where you can go deeper and really get behind the scenes of what drives them, what's their passion, what are they interested in. And that is where you make the magic happen. That's where there's matches really going on. Always working on building rapport. And our goal, right, is moving from just having kind of a rapport with someone so we can get to know their business better and take their perspective, to being that trusted advisor. I remember we talked a lot about examples where I have business leaders who we've had individuals work with and get jobs with who come back to me with questions, right? So that they're trusting me to help them, not necessarily strategically run their business. I don't know their business as well as they do, but maybe they say, is there another way to look at this position? Is there another way to look at these process flows or how to do the work differently? Because that's how we've come into working with them. And then it goes into even stranger things. I had a conversation with this office supply CEO recently who was trying to figure out how to work with my staff, right? So he wanted to figure out how the communication should go in the conversation. I'm like, of course I can help you with that. And then off the cuff at the end of the conversation, it's like, I just want to let you know I'm having my first baby in a few months. So it's like, it deepens that connection, it deepens that relationship such that, we're going beyond just kind of the day-to-day business. And that's, to me, that kind of, you've got to that gem point. So reminder, this is all what we're trying to do. Everything we do in these relationship buildings and building rapport and understanding is getting to that trusted advisor perspective. So does that all gel? Does that kind of get everyone back into where we're at today? All right, so back to kind of the framework. Always got to have a framework so you kind of know where we're at and a phase. We remember we talked about this as the customer journey. This is borrowed from the private kind of for-profit world, but this idea that employers are a customer, just like the disability job seekers that we have, people with disabilities, they have a journey, right? So the journey starts with us connecting with them. We raise awareness. We hopefully build a deeper relationship so we can start talking to them more about the nuts and bolts of hiring somebody or placing somebody or reorganizing the work to kind of put somebody in there in a customized job into that consideration phase. That's where that curiosity comes in, deepening that relationship. And now we're going to talk today mostly about conversion or closure. Sometimes people talk about kind of closing the sale or converting. And we're also going to touch on continuation because although the 1, 2, 3 is kind of where you go from not knowing anything to somebody all the way to hopefully that placement. What's also equally important in engagement is that continuation or that ongoing engagement with someone that you already have a relationship with, you have placed somebody with, and making sure that you keep deepening that relationship and keep having check-ins, keeping the conversation going, because as any business will tell you, it's easy to get a sale from an existing customer than it is to find a new customer. And that's everywhere, not only just in our industry, but that's across the board. So this four phase framework is incredibly important for us to keep remembering where we're at. and we're going to dive into conversion and closure right now. Okay. So what we're going to try and do today, we're going to talk about the ABCs of selling, and I've got a couple of videos that will help us kind of talk a little bit more about that, the do's and the don'ts around kind of how to sell and what does the ABCs actually mean. One of the things that we don't talk a lot about in this industry, and it's again one of those areas that it seems a bit weird for us to think about kind of negotiation, but we are negotiating a lot all the time, whether it's kind of to place someone or not place someone, negotiating hours, pay rate, whatever it may be. And sometimes we're doing it on behalf of the people we support. Sometimes we're doing it with the people we support. Sometimes we're just supporting that individual to be able to negotiate. But a lot of times I find in this industry, we don't have room to negotiate because we're working with these big box, large corporations who've got fixed dimensions, right? They've got a fixed job, they've got a fixed job description. It pays this, it has these hours, this is the job description. You have to fill it. Good luck, right? And that often puts the people we support with disabilities at a disadvantage. They may not be able to complete all of those aspects of the job duties. They may not be able to do a 40-hour a week or may not want to do a 40-hour a week. And that is why negotiation is really important as a skill set for us to kind of learn and move forward. Myths, right? We all talk about the myths of hiring people with disabilities. We're going to touch on that and objections and making sure that we tackle those objections head on. And then we're going to talk a couple of strategies around ongoing engagement because I think that is something that we sometimes forget about moving forward. Okay. Again, any questions, any thoughts, stop me at any time. Put something in the chat so we can continue forward. All right. So before I show this video, a little bit of, let me stop this first. A little bit of context. The title "Coffee is for Closers" is a kind of interesting thing. But this is a video from the 90s. It's from Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a video. To be honest, I've not actually seen the whole video. I've seen this snippet very many times now, but it talks about the ABCs of selling, and it's really it's a fascinating look back, right? Sometimes the recent history we look back kind of gives you a perspective of where we've come from. But let's take a listen into this, and I'd love to hear from you as you're listening to it. It's a very short video, less than 2 minutes. As you're listening to it in the chat, as we talk about it after, I will kind of get people's feedback on what you took away from this. And give me a thumbs up that the sound is coming through and the volume is okay.
Are they all here? All but one. Well, I'm going anyway. Let's talk about something important. Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only. Oh, have I got your attention now? Good. Because we're adding a little something to this month's sales contest. As you all know, first prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Anybody want to see second prize? Second prize is a set of steak knives. You've got leads. Mitch and Murray paid good money. Get their names to sell them.
The leads are weak.
The leads are weak. Only one thing counts in this life. Get them to sign on the line which is dotted. A, B, C. A always be B, C closing. Always be closing. Always be closing. These are the new leads. These are the Glengarry leads. And to you, they're gold. And you don't get them. Why? Because to give them to you is just throwing them away. They're for closers.
Apologies that I didn't put the closed captioning on ahead of time. Any thoughts or reactions? Throw into the chat here. What I took away was very much kind of aggression, right? Like this is sales practices we've heard from kind of the past, like the used car salesman, the slick guy that would be kind of throwing things in your face. And it's kind of this cutthroat business. Fortunately, We don't live in that world. Fortunately, we don't have to kind of worry about those things. But that ABC around always be, I love the A always, B, B, C closing, the always be closing. That is a common thing that you hear in or used to hear in kind of the sales force. It's like you should always be thinking about how to move that deal along, how to move that deal along. But hopefully what you've taken away from anything from this webinar is this is a process. The customer has a journey. You have to build rapport. You have to build this relationship to be able to get that. Taking the coffee away is the ultimate punishment. Oh my gosh. Whoever said that, Michelle, I am totally with you. Coffee is my drug of choice. And coffee for closers. I mean, maybe there would be the incentive for us to be kind of better closers if coffee was the incentive. But it's an interesting thing here is that aggression and this like I am the expert salesperson shoving stuff down the customer's throat. The old model was the salesperson had all the information, right? So I don't know if any of you bought a car recently. I actually bought one last weekend. And when I first bought a car 30 plus years ago, I didn't have all the information, right? So that salesperson was come to me, they would tell me everything, they would, give me all of the bells and whistles. And I didn't know. I didn't know really kind of how to compare it to other things. I didn't have information on price tags or MSRPs or all this other information. Well, now this beautiful thing called the internet gives us everything, right? It equalizes the information between what we have and that seller. So they don't have the advantage anymore. They can't just talk to us. They can't just tell us and we'd be like, "Oh, wow, you're the best person ever." They have to rely on really getting to know us and our needs and what we want. And that is the simple difference that the world of sales has changed. To be honest with you, I don't think the world of sales for us has changed. I think we've always come from a perspective of getting to know that employer and really building the relationship because we're trying to sell something very unique. We're not selling a Cadillac Eldorado here. We're selling unique individuals with unique solutions. And so we've had to do it very differently. But I just kind of like this background because it kind of sets up here. Let me move page here to what I've read and seen is the new ABCs of selling. And so Dan Pink is a pretty famous writer, psychologist who's done a lot of different work around kind of motivating people and incentivizing individuals. And so his book To Sell is Human is a really well done book because it actually says that we're all salespeople, right? It's not just the used car salesman or that job developer. We're all selling, right? Whether it's an idea we have with a co-worker or a boss, whether it's is with your partner where you say, "Hey, I want to go to Budapest and Prague for the summer." We're all salespeople and we're always trying to influence others all the time. So no matter, again, if you're on the front line of sales in this industry or if you're just a part of an organization or you're in a position, you're always influencing people. So his ABCs are right here: attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. I think he probably struggled with figuring out what the A is. Attunement is an interesting kind of word, but to me, it means ensuring I understand that employer from the perspective, right? I want to take their perspective. I want to understand where they're coming from. I want to understand what makes them tick. All of the stuff that we've talked about, right? So I love that this hones into kind of, again, where we've come from in the sense of making sure we take that employer's perspective. So focusing on the employer's needs, buoyancy. So this is the really hardest part of our job, I think, is the rejection, right? We spend a lot of time going out there and someone says, "No, I can't hire. No, I don't want to hire. No, we can't." And you get a lot of rejections. That is the crux of sales. Whether again you're selling internally to a coworker or your boss, or you're in your industry trying to figure out how to get an employer to hire somebody, there's a lot of no's, right? And many people have perspectives. One more no is the closer I get to a yes. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's great, but that doesn't keep me going every day," right? So the idea of buoyancy and being resilient to the no's is something that we have to spend a lot of time thinking about. And I've got a page after this that we'll jump into a little bit more detail, but really thinking about, especially for new people coming into this field, they're going to get probably a lot more no's than maybe an experienced person, and they've got to just go through that process. So again, as a team lead, as a coworker of someone new, thinking about how do you help? How do you kind of make sure that people are resilient to those rejections that do come? They're just the reality. And then clarity. And I think this one is probably where again, it's an experience thing that you live into. So attunement, we're getting closer and understanding the business perspective. Clarity is again taking all the information, all the noise, all of the background around our regulations, our funding, what that business needs, and trying to curate it into a package that's simple to understand. It makes sense to the employer and also makes sense to the job seeker, right? And so that clarity is really important. And so it goes back to kind of getting into a business and understanding how they operate, how to add value, using those lean principles we've talked about, understanding the basics, and so curating into a solution, right? So you got to find the problems to be able to create the solutions. And so that clarity comes in as being really important here. So those ABCs have changed, right? From the Glengarry Glen Ross and the steak knives that you could have won. We've kind of moved on here a little bit, and hopefully this ABC kind of resonates for people here. Rejection is protection. Oh, Shalice, I'm not sure what to make of that. Rejection is protection. Okay. Maybe you could expand on that in the chat, Shalice, because I'm not sure I'm following with you. Because I think for many people, rejection is tough, and it is sometimes why people burn out in this field, and it is something that is real. Why individuals who come in from a social perspective and a social services perspective and want to help people with disabilities, and then we put them into this business mindset. I think it's sometimes a bit of a struggle. So again, I think it's a real thing that we have to focus in on helping people. And this is just something I was able to kind of pull together. Again, it's from Dan Pink, and it talks about the ideas of optimism, right? So it's easy to say just be optimistic, right? That's sometimes easier said than done. If I'm not feeling well or things aren't great in other parts of my life, it may be hard for me to bring my most optimistic self to the equation. But I think what happens is kind of that handling objections and handling rejection is figuring out these beliefs, the beliefs that we have to kind of change. And they're around personalizing the situation, about the fact that the situation is pervasive and that's meant to be permanent. It's spelt wrong. But how that situation is permanent to me. So the personalization is blaming myself. If I go into to an employer and they say no, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my fault. I did that wrong. I'm the worst. You can see how that can kind of spiral out into a problematic place. We have to teach people to kind of really analyze that, right? Like, was it really you? It may have been, right? Maybe you weren't prepared enough. Maybe you hadn't done some research around the company. Maybe you could have done some more. But often it's a case of where that employer is. It's often a case of what the situation and timing is. And so that restatement of kind of that rejection from an optimist perspective is something we have to kind of practice going forward. Pervasive, so whole life impact. Oh my gosh, I'm terrible at my job. Thus, everything is bad, right? Like my life is ruined. I'm going to lose my job and it's going to be the worst thing ever. And I think, again, it's really important for balance, this work-life balance, that people understand work is work and life is life. And things at work don't necessarily mean that things in the rest of my life are bad and disastrous and the end of the world. So again, that idea that it's kind of limited. It's limited to that particular episode, limited to that particular day, limited to that particular meeting, maybe. And so reminding people of context is really important. And then permanent, right? Like those negative feelings are going to be forever. I'm never going to get out of this funk. I've had 3 rejections this week. This won't end. And again, I think context, so kind of veterans talking to newbies, older individuals who've got sort of the practices, is learning how to deal with this negativity that can come out of here and the burnout. And again, I don't know about you, we face it here. There's a lot of turnover. I can't say all the turnover is based on this, but employment, this is a real deal that we have to kind of live into and face and kind of understand. So I just wanted to touch on that. Okay, so Shalice, sometimes being rejected will ultimately protect the potential hire from enduring about it. Well, 100%. I love that perspective now, Shalice. That makes a lot more sense, right? Maybe you get a no from someone because it wasn't meant to be. You are clearly the ultimate optimist, Shalice, so I appreciate that perspective. If other people have got ideas or thoughts or things that they do around kind of making themselves resilient or making their team resilient, throw it into the chat, because I think, again, there's a place where we can learn from each other. You know, I have a very dear colleague here, Danae, who is a meditator. She meditates a lot. But we have a executive team meeting every Friday, and that's often the beginning of the meeting is like just detox, right? It's like take away all the stuff that's happening, or the emails I just had to respond to, all the bad things maybe and then just detox before moving into a meeting. And so she has a lot of practices that I rely on to help me think about kind of centering myself, giving context to where it is. Dawn's got here, come back a different day and ask a different way. Yeah, I love that. Learn what didn't work. And I think, again, if we use that idea of curiosity, that what went wrong? And again, sometimes you do have to look at yourself. Was I not prepared? Was I not on my A game? What more could I have done? But you can't blame everything on yourself, because then that's just too much. My team is so good about sharing when things are difficult and cheering successes. I love that. Thanks, Nicole. Having that constant encouragement and cheerleading makes a huge difference for me. Yeah, I think it's important as a team. Sometimes we're out on our own. We have our own caseload. We're working with our own employers, and it's difficult then to kind of share those wins and successes. So you need a venue to be able to do that. And sometimes you may need two heads, right? Two heads are better than one. I think we talked about this before. Sometimes when we're going in to meet an employer, two heads going in can see things differently. So when we're going behind the scenes or doing a tour, seeing different perspectives, people can take away different ideas. So keep those ideas coming. I think it's really important that we share ways to keep resilient in the face of negativity. So we are selling. We have to remind ourselves we are in the position of selling. And so we have to remind ourselves what we're selling. We're not necessarily just selling for a job, right? We want to get away from just kind of thinking it's about a job, it's about a placement. Yes, that is a piece of it, but we are bigger than that. If we go back to the consultative sales, we are these staffing solutions providers. We're workforce development professionals who are thinking about that whole workforce arc, right? So the onboarding, the ongoing support that may be there or needed, any technical assistance. So there may be accommodations, small, low tech to bigger and higher tech, where you need to draw on other resources like the job accommodation network. Education, I know a lot of us do this already around kind of educating the employers on hiring persons with disability and employing persons with disability and what that means and so on and so forth. So education is a piece of what we're selling. And then I like this piece because it seems to have worked for us, is when we have our smaller and medium-sized businesses come in, we're inviting them into our community of other employer partners. They belong to a group of like-minded individuals who are community-oriented, who are focusing on diversity and inclusion, and are really kind of being ahead of the curve of other people. We celebrate that. We're going to talk more about that in ongoing continuation, but that inviting them into a new community, I think, is also a piece of what we're selling. We're also selling our clients on the idea of working. Yeah. So again, thank you, Anne-Marie, for that idea that we've got these two customers that we're all constantly battling to influence and sell. I think that's really important. As we focus on the employers, though, don't just go laser silo focused on the job. There's much more to that the employers actually want and need, and often sometimes will pay for. Fortunately, most of us are able to provide a lot of these services for free because of the funding mechanisms that are there to help us do that. But one of the first questions I get from many employers is, what does this cost, right? Because they're often used to paying a staffing agency to go get somebody, and they pay a lot of money to do that. So it's not too far from the possibility of us being able to recoup some resources for what we're doing beyond finding good quality matches of people, but all of this other stuff that we do for free. So again, as this industry proceeds and progresses, there may be places where a lot of us are actually getting private businesses to pay for our services, which wouldn't that be nice, right? Another source of revenue to help going forward. And any other ideas of selling, please put it into the chat, because this is definitely not exhaustive here. All right. So the other piece of selling is negotiating, right? So we often find ourselves having to negotiate with an employer. So That could be as simple as hire them or not hire them. It could be as simple as full-time to part-time. It could be the conditions, the schedule, the hours, the pay, all of these aspects of negotiation. And to be honest with you, in my experience, when you've gone through this whole process of connecting and consideration, a lot of the negotiations happening real time as you go through the process. If you are typically like previous days of kind of just placing somebody and working with a big box organization, there's no negotiation, right? The job is set up, the hours are set up, the pay is set up, the benefits are set up, and you're just placing. There isn't negotiation, and you can't negotiate with the target corporation because that's already like 16 layers ahead of the person you're meeting with in that particular store. So this is really focused in on when you're working with that small and medium-sized business. Like I work with this lab CEO. We're negotiating with him. He's the decision maker. He's the one who's going to say, oh my gosh, we totally need this 40 hours. Oh, really? We only need 15 or whatever the number is. That's where we're really negotiating. So it's really important, again, with those small and medium-sized businesses is thinking about negotiation. So Getting to Yes is a famous book written by Dr. Fisher and Ury, who are kind of, I don't know if they're Nobel winners or anything like that, but they do a lot of kind of across the world negotiation. They're negotiating, war and peace and big things like that, major things. So this is just a video that kind of gets you through kind of the basics around getting to yes, and really focuses on this idea of interests and positions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this afterwards. And I will make sure I get closed captioning on right away.
A simple parable delivers the key message in Getting to Yes. It's the story of an orange. To be precise, one orange and two people who both want it. They argue about ownership for a while and eventually decide to divide it, half each. And so they separate, feeling they achieved the fairest solution. What they don't know is why the other person needed the orange. If they had, then the solution would have been quite different, because one wanted the peel to use in baking a cake and the other wanted the fruit to eat. Had they known that, they each would have gotten twice as much. And they most certainly would have got to yes a whole lot more quickly. If you haven't heard that story, maybe you didn't see it coming. That's because in negotiations, we focus on our positions, as in I want the orange, rather than the underlying interests that drive those positions, as in I want to bake an orange cake. It sounds so obvious when it's explained, yet we persist in taking positions which tend to be I win, you lose confrontations, often missing solutions that best address the interests of both sides. If we can see our way to take the interests-driven route, it's so much easier to get to yes. The journey to yes. The idea is to constantly search for mutual gains that aren't immediately identifiable. For example, suppose a city plans to double the taxes paid by a local refinery. The city's interest is in getting more money for civic development, but since it can't keep calling on the oil company to foot the bill, it needs to broaden its tax base. The oil firm, on the other hand, wants to expand, and getting a plastics plant to move close by would help with their plans. But the plastics manufacturers would almost certainly be put off by the prospect of high taxes. The shared interest is that both the city and the oil company want industrial expansion. Solutions might include a tax holiday for incoming businesses, a joint campaign to attract new investment, or a reduction in taxes for companies that expand their local activities. On the other hand, failure to identify these common interests could result in soured relationships where everyone loses. The company could slow production due to rising costs, and the city's citizens could lose jobs, creating more strain on the city's already tight resources. 3 points about shared interests are worth remembering. First, many shared interests are often concealed or never uncovered in negotiation. You have to work hard to identify them. Second, there are only opportunities if you find a way of turning them into a shared goal. And third, focusing on them can make negotiations smoother and friendlier. Even differing interests may offer opportunities. Think of that orange story we began with. The interests of the two people were quite different, but could have been dovetailed together to provide a neat solution. Recall the nursery rhyme about Jack Sprat, who could eat no fat, and his wife, who could eat no lean. Get the picture? Getting to yes is all about identifying what's really important for each party, dealing with the differences and finding common ground. It's achieved by brainstorming and trying to view issues from each other's perspectives. This process produces a range of imaginative solutions to satisfy the interests of both sides to create a true win-win solution.
Stop it there because it kind of has a lot of nothing after that. So this idea of interest, right? So often people have positions, they stand firmly on their positions, and we forget about the interests behind it. So the positions are kind of the what. Let me move this page over here. This idea of kind of, I need to have the orange, right? The orange is just a beautiful parable that they talk about a lot in the book, and it's used throughout. This idea that I need to have the orange and you need to have the orange, but not really understanding the why, right? And so I don't know if you remember way back when at the first session that we did, the why is also important for many things that we do, and understanding and getting behind it. And so this idea of shared interests, I think, is really critical, and understanding kind of what's that employer's interest behind their position. Their position is, it's got to be a 40-hour a week position, or it's got to be a position that starts at 6 a.m. or whatever their position may be, is where that negotiation happens. And if we just leave it at that, we often just walk away, right? We don't sort of come to any conclusion because we can't seem to meet in the middle, or maybe that job seeker isn't going to be able to accommodate, or whatever it may be. But if we start really getting behind those positions with the interests and the whys, we really start to have a chance to have a conversation and really understand kind of, actually, maybe we're both on the same page. We want lower turnover, we want good job matches, we want kind of retention, and so on and so forth. And so often it's that conversation that gets missed, and I feel like that's something that we forget from time to time. So it's really important to talk about this idea of negotiations, and there's 4 fundamentals that come out of the book. And it's fascinating. The first one is people, separating people from the problems. I don't know if you've heard, be hard on the problem, not on the people. For a lot of times in our organization, something would happen, and it'd be a failure or a mistake or something like that, and everybody like, oh my gosh, that person did that, right? Instead of really understanding and sitting back and say, okay, what was behind that? What was the lead up to this? And it's fascinating. This last month, this office supply company, again, who I have a very close relationship with the CEO, but job specialists are working with them to kind of get jobs and get that second hire and third hire and so on and so forth. Well, they got into an impasse. The employment specialists had thought that they had got the job situated. The employer was kind of like humming and hawing. There was a lot of hesitation. This kind of got the frustration up of the employment specialist. They don't know what they're doing because, of course, they've got another customer, the job seeker, and then also the family behind the job seeker. And it all kind of escalated into this kind of bizarre kind of finger pointing that went on. And eventually the employer said, we can't hire this person right now. What the job specialist heard was can't hire. Didn't hear the right now, didn't hear the other aspects of it, and was just very much focused on they're not being fair, they're not being equitable, they're not, all of these things, right? So I'm like, okay, let me have a conversation. Because again, in the cheap seats, it's easy for me to have a conversation. I'm not close to what's going on. And I find out that they're in chaos. The warehouse where we were going to put an individual into was literally at 120% capacity. There was no room for actually more physical bodies because it was just full of stuff, and they were trying to expand their space. And he just needed time. He just needed more time to solve the problems that he had. And we needed more time to understand them better. So it wasn't a question of sort of saying, no, we can't, it's an impasse. It was just something that just needed to be negotiated. It was clearly a mutual interest. He does want to hire someone that we support. But we just needed to kind of think that through. And sometimes we get so worked up about the situation that we don't see that forest for the trees. So I think that's a really important thing is, again, sometimes you might need to tag team with somebody else to help you get that context and see behind and separate the problem from the people. And why do we care about separating the problem from the people? Because we want that long-term relationship. There's going to be some wins and there's going to be some losses, but over the long term, we're deepening that relationship, right? And if we just throw them out, we don't get that second opportunity. We don't get that next time. And we then get brandished. And as an industry, we get brandished as people who are, too emotionally wrapped up or not able to negotiate or not able to kind of work through things. And I think we're better than that. We've talked about this, the interest and the positions, again, super critical, getting behind what is that initial what statement that employer or whoever you're negotiating with is saying, and really try to understand what's driving it. Getting to shared interests, so coming up with different options where we can maybe come together and negotiate. And then the criteria piece, I think, is more focused on what's not acceptable. So, we clearly know that we wouldn't accept below minimum wage, right? That's not acceptable. We probably wouldn't accept many other aspects of things because of maybe our regulations or our funding or just what's industry standard. So also coming prepared to negotiations to say, if somebody's getting hired into the position, what is the industry standard? What's the market rate in Louisville or wherever at Lexington it may be? And making sure you come with that, because that's more information that an employer doesn't know, a chance to educate. So I think these four fundamentals of principled negotiations are critical for us to just keep in the back of our mind as we move forward. And what I want to do, this is breakout time, and I said 10:40, Katie, but it's 10:46, so you've got 6 extra minutes. We're going to go into breakout groups, and I want people to talk a little bit about when they faced an employer position that maybe is an impasse or feels like an impasse, and where you've been able to kind of understand what's behind it, where those positions are, the whys. And it may be safety, right? Or it may be timing or budget or other things like that. I just want a general discussion within your group. And we've taken your feedback because we've heard from many of the people who've done the surveys. Thank you very much for that feedback, that our breakouts have been a little bit kind of disorganized or maybe just a little bit flowy flow. And so we've got facilitators for each of the breakout groups. Thank you to all the volunteers. And they're going to help stimulate the conversation. So hopefully it'll be a richer conversation. I think we're going to set it for 10 minutes. And Katie, are you all set with the breakouts? Awesome. So go explore positions and start sharing and conversing. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a fruitful discussion. The facilitators hopefully kind of led you guys through some thoughts. I don't know if the facilitators want to throw something in the chat, or if anyone who's a participant in the group throws ideas in the chat, positions that you heard, kind of the interest behind them. I think it's important for us, again, sort of to have the kind of that reference list of kind of what are we hearing? What is often something that are coming back from our employers, so we can start sort of thinking about how to address them and tackle them head on. So as you come back in, type stuff into the chat. We'll gather here. Everyone's closing out of their rooms in the next few seconds. And we'll kind of repeat the message out to everybody. Any initial thoughts, any initial feelings that came out of the conversations around the idea of interests and positions and how they're different and how we sometimes ignore maybe the interests and weigh in on those kind of impasses of positions? Again, throw any thoughts or ideas into the chat. If any of the facilitators had any kind of insights or thoughts that came back in that stood out, feel free to, again, throw them in the chat or speak up if you'd like. We can do both. We have the technology. I think everyone is back. Joanna,
I think
go.
one of the biggest challenges that I continually see is just still society's misconceptions about disability. And the description that I used in our group was, if I see a person that looks a particular way, I have expectations that they can't do certain things, and those might be wrong. Or if I see a person who looks completely typical, And then I have these expectations that they can do things, and that might be wrong. And
Yeah.
so I think that building those relationships becomes so important, because so many people in the typical world just have no idea how nuanced a person with a disability, you know, what does that even mean?
Right. Right.
And employers who are like, well, we don't hire with people with disabilities. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, 1 out of 4 people has a disability. So do the math. Yes, you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. You got a bunch. You have a bunch of them. You just don't know. Right. That's a really good point. And it's that grand scheme of awareness. We're all talking here about small awareness, right? The world that we can influence and that we do. So what Katie and the bigger Employment First are doing a bigger scale. So at different layers we're tackling it, right? But it is practice, right? I got to see it. We're humans. We got to smell it, feel it, touch it, and to really understand it. And so if I have a brother with a developmental disability and he's worked for 30 years. I get it, right? I live and breathe it. But if somebody hasn't, I think it's empathizing with where they're at and then tackling it, not getting emotionally angry about it or upset about it. It's like, I just got to educate you, right? That's all. And having more materials to educate. So, I mean, we're going to talk in the second half a little bit about objections and myths and stuff like that. And the litany of research now that's out there that I think sometimes we don't draw on as much as we should is kind of eye-opening, right? And I think sometimes, facts are great and studies are great and reports are great and we need to have that, but sometimes people just got to do it, right? Or see it being done somewhere else. And so those employer testimonials, like, oh, that dude, I know him, or that lady, I know her from the chamber. Like they've done it. Oh, then I probably could do that, right? And there's a little bit of competition comes in too, and an incentive around it as well. But yeah. There's the big A awareness and there's a little A awareness on other things. In the chat here, Dawn, identify the need and demonstrate how the job candidate can meet their needs. Yeah, offer a valuable contribution to the workforce. Yeah, and sometimes that's hard to do, right? Because you don't know until they're in there and they're working. So there's always a bit of a leap of faith. I mean, it's true if you hire anyone, disability and not disability, is a leap of faith. I've interviewed them. Oh, so they must be able to do the job. I'm like, an interview doesn't tell you anything generally. It tells you that they can interview. So it's a constant thing that's true of hiring people with or without disabilities. Andrew wrote a theme that came out of our room was the interest of time, having time to train, adjust for time for scheduling accommodations. We hit on employer education, understanding accommodations. Yeah, I'll be surprised. I think a lot of employers understand it takes time to get somebody up to speed, but to Joanna's point, there's the myth that it takes longer, right, for someone with a disability. So again, in some cases that may be true. We can't hide away from everything. We can't say it's all unicorns and rainbows. Sometimes it might, but that's our role, right? That if we're good at what we do, then that's where we insert ourselves. That's where we hopefully can bring down the time that's involved or bring in accommodations. That's our expertise. And if we're not doing that, then an employer's gonna have a feeling about it, right? So there is a combination there. Nicole, our group discussed lots preconceived notions, what a person with disability may look like or able to do. Employers and policies are stuck in doing things the way they've always been. Yeah. And again, I think it's also think back to that big box versus small local employers. I just can't push on that enough. Big box people, they've got people in wherever their headquarters are designing how a store looks or designing how a restaurant is. They've been thinking about it for years. They've got all of it. You can't change that by just coming in and saying, hey, I'm a employment development special. But a local employer, a small business who's constantly moving their business around or constantly changing things, they're more amenable, right? They're more adaptable. And I think that's important that we keep focusing on that. Therefore, without us to suggest that someone be able to do part of the duties of a job, right? And for instance, one person can't run the register but can stock and straighten the floor, of course, assist customers. The other employer can focus on register. Yeah, the idea sometimes it comes up that 2 for 1, right? We'll take a 40-hour job and split into 2. That's something alien to most employers, right? And so that is something that I think as you deepen the relationship, as you gain trust as a trusted advisor, you can introduce that. You can't start with that introduction, right? Because they're like, what? I just met you. So you've got to kind of warm up to that. So now with employers that we have constant relationships and we've gained their credibility and reliability, then I can get a bit wild and wacky and try some new ideas with them because they're trusting. But you can't do that from the jump, right? Why would somebody kind of jump into that? Katie, room about the stigma. Yeah, lack of understanding of what disability is, the importance of being prepared to explain our role. Yeah, who are you? What do you do? Where do you come from? And why are you here? And what people have to offer is the employee, like other employees, we can offer additional help as needed. Yeah, and I think we said this earlier. It's like, hey, do I have to pay for you? Right? Like this, like you come for free, you're part of the package. What does that mean? And sometimes that's like, wait a minute, there's another person who's going to be sitting in my very complicated manufacturing plant. That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that. So again, being able to see that and maybe testimonials from other similar types of businesses of how it's worked. Really important. I remember a lot of conversation about employees worrying about the liability. Yeah, so objections and myths, that's definitely a big piece of it. We're going to talk about that after the break. So let's get back on track here. I don't need to weigh on this, but I do think once we get into those positions, like what is it really that an employer wants from a new employee or an employee in a particular role? I do think we think about it, right? They want lower retention. They want higher retention. They want lower turnover. They want people sticking around and loyal. And we can help with that once we understand what it means to be a good employee there. What we understand is like they prioritize quality over quantity, or they prioritize safety over other things. Once we know that, we can do better jobs of matching and then meet all of those goals that they have. So there's a lot of shared interests that businesses have that we just got to really understand and listen to what they are. Just quickly before we take a 5-minute break, there's this concept called BATNA. I was like, what the heck does that mean? But it's the best alternative to non-agreement. So sometimes there's an impasse, right? We can't agree on whether it's full-time or part-time or the schedule or routine. And so when one comes without a good alternative, which often we do, right? When we've got a job seeker, they may not have any other opportunity. We kind of don't have much skin in the game of negotiation. We don't have a lot of power. And I liken it to, again, the car sales example, because I bought a car over the weekend. I didn't mean to buy a car over the weekend. But we got there, I loved the car. The guy puts the price tag in there. I'm like, I don't want to pay that. And because my best alternative, I don't need to buy a car. I had a better alternative. I walked away saving $4,000 on a vehicle, right? So again, when one has a good fallback, and again, that's part of our system in supporting job seekers with disabilities, they need to have more options, right? So they're not forced into taking the first one that's around, or taking whatever is being given to them. That idea of having a better alternative to non-agreement is really important. But we also know the negotiations, right? So where we can agree with employers that they need to focus on safety maybe, and why you need to hire this person for a particular schedule and a routine, when we blend those mutual interests, we can come to agreement. But when you don't have a good BATNA, you're sitting there kind of begging. And it's really important, again, that we make sure the job seekers have more than one, all their eggs in one basket, and have more than one opportunity, because again, they're often then sort of saying, I'll just take it, whatever it is. And that often leads to bad matches as well, which is the reason we do this job, is good job matches for our employers. All right. As I promised, you get a break. We take 5 minutes, if that's okay. But I will start in 5 minutes. Go take a bio break, get some coffee, recharge, and we'll be back. Right. I know. Oh, the recording is in progress. That means that we're back and live, and that's good. All right, so let's get back into this. I've got a lot of information I'm going to share, and to be honest with you, I'm going to go over it in quite cursory ways, because you're going to get all of this material and it's all the reference to you. But we're now going to flip into kind of, okay, we've got people through, we've kind of understand where they are, their positions, their interests, and we want to kind of move forward. One of the things that we've done is called a needs and benefit analysis, and then this proposal around it. So especially important with customized employment, where you're trying to, again, like we talked about, that clarity, curate all the information you've heard. You've done a tour, you've heard from the employer, you've got a sense of what their positions and interests are, but what they really want and what they need out of an employee, and what the tasks are, and you're kind of assembling something new. This is very much more customized employment, but it could be used in supported employment where you're trying to do some carving of a position, and you lay out, basically you reflect back to the employer, this is what I heard, this is what I think you're interested in, this is what I think you need, and if you hire this person, they can do X, Y, and Z. And so don't dwell on the page. I'm going to actually send you a PDF of the example of this. But in essence, it's a proposal, right? So much like anyone who a vendor sells you something, they give you a proposal. And why don't we do that in our line of business? If you've got a template, it's something you can easily fill in. But it says, hey, I take this seriously. I am listening to what you have. I'm reflecting back. So if I've got it wrong, you have a chance to sort of go back and forth. And then we have this chance to co-create something. And it's often just a way for the employee to kind of settle in with something. It can be a leave behind, right? You've met with them, you've got to this idea of a position, you leave this behind for them to reflect on, and then you have a reason to go back and circle back with them to get their reaction. So it's another draw and another way to kind of, again, improve your credibility with an employer. And it can look pretty professional. And again, this is just one example. There's many different examples out there. And again, you can tailor it to what you want. But again, the concept is reflect on kind of what you've heard of the needs, reflect on the benefits of putting this position in place, and then really get into the details of laying it out and what the impact is. Lay out hours, lay out pay rates, as much detail as you can, so there's something to react to. So I wanted to just touch on that. So objections, right? So we often have objections. This idea of stigmas and myths that are coming out are just basically objections. I found this online as a good kind of mechanism and a mnemonic to remember, solve, where you start by kind of, empathize, right? The employer's got a reason and you may not understand it, but that's part of your job, is to understand it. So first you just got to recognize and reflect that there is a concern. Try to get a sense of what's behind it. Again, this is these interests that we're talking about. What's behind it? What's the why that the person has a barrier or a concern, like we've mentioned in the chat, liability or safety or whatever it may be, right? Listen to the reason in full. So dig, keep being curious about kind of what's coming from that concern. Don't just immediately react, oh, they just don't like people with disabilities. Listen, 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 dig, dig, dig. And then reflect, kind of push it back onto them so you make sure, did I hear this correctly? Is this what you're trying to say the concern or objection is? And then solve it, right? If you can't solve it, you're going to need time to come back and address it. But that's the key, right? What's the safety concern? What's the liability concern? So on and so forth. And what I'm going to share kind of the next few slides are some, again, data, results, studies, findings that might help address some of the kind of more general objections, specific objections to a particular employer or specific objections to a particular job seeker. We can't address that here, but I think those general stigma and myths that are out there, I think, are important. And the other key thing is don't kind of sit back and wait for the objection to come. If you're kind of with this building rapport with them, already getting a feel that they're not understanding, tackle them head on. Like, take the objection head on, and not like in an aggressive way. Don't go back to Alec Baldwin and the Glengarry Glen Ross. Come in and just seek understanding. Just kind of get a better viewpoint of what's happening there. So you go online and you look at kind of, okay, myths for disability employment, and it's anywhere between there's 5 or 500. So I put together kind of some of the bigger ones here. This first one is the myth of performance, right? Someone with a disability can't do the job. And again, this is a general set of studies that I've kind of curated together. Again, hopefully is a reference point for you. Everyone knows probably the DuPont study. I don't even remember kind of why DuPont did it, but like they started way back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they did a study that found that 90% of employees with disabilities rated average or better in job performance, right? So plenty of studies out there, plenty of longevity out there. We've got the VCU study here, labor statistics. The businesses that include employees with disabilities see a 72% increase in productivity, right? These are facts, right? These aren't generated. These are facts that have come from different studies. And then the Walgreens model that you've probably all heard of, Randy Lewis, who started kind of really making a big inclusive effort with his distribution centers throughout the South and the Northeast. At 10 of the 13 distribution centers, employees with disabilities were more productive than those without. And you're like, okay, what about the other 3? Well, they were about the same. So this is really, and in fact, there's actually 31 distribution centers. So the other 18 distribution centers, there was no difference. So this is the only ones that had statistically significant differences. The people with disabilities were more productive. So again, you don't want to throw this in somebody's face. They're just there if you think you need them. And again, if I'm somebody who works in a particularly unique, complex manufacturing business, I'm like, well, they're different, right? That's always going to be the answer. They're different. Of course, everybody's different, right? But in general, people who've worked in DuPont, pretty complex stuff, Walgreens distribution center, incredibly complex stuff. We have seen, right? We have evidence that says people with disability can be as productive and perform. The little box there is from this thing called Getting to Equal, the Disability Inclusion Advantage. So it's a report by Accenture, which is a former kind of management consulting company like a McKinsey. They've done a massive report around big corporations and the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they've coined this term disability champions. So they look at a bunch of factors like policies, practices, metrics around those organizations, and they call people who've got high scores and ratings in all of those DEI factors disability champions. And the result of their study is when they look at disability champions versus kind of average corporations, disability and champions do better, right? They have 1.6x more revenue, they have 2.6x net income, and twice economic profit. So there's something to it, right? It's something that's appealing enough that it's something that hopefully is a bit of a hook for people to say, yeah, performance is an individual issue, and that's true of any employee, disability or not disability. But on the average, on the norm, when people with disabilities are in the workplace, things get better. Things are okay. So again, these are just sort of the myths that keep coming up, and there's some facts that hopefully you can use as a reference going forward. And second myth, attendance, right? So people with disability, they don't show up to work, or they're sick all the time, they're late, whatever there may be. Again, DuPont comes to the top here. 86% of employees with disabilities rated above average or average in their attendance. This one is interesting. Found a study of employees' perceptions. This report, the amount of sick time and cost of absenteeism were the same or lower for employees with disabilities. And again, all the employees surveyed in a different report in '98 that disabled employees had comparable absentee rates. So again, it's not earth-shattering. It's not saying, oh my gosh, people with disabilities are so much better. It's saying they're the same. That's it. They're people. People get sick, disability or not disability. And so I think it starts kind of leveling the playing field a little bit. It doesn't, again, solve all of it, but there's just more information that we can kind of leverage as we go out there and start talking to people. Safety and workman's comp. So this is a big one, especially when you go into kind of really complex places. Oh my gosh, this is so dangerous. My environment is so dangerous. The chemicals we use or the tools we use or whatever it may be. And again, DuPont has many studies, and DuPont's a chemical business. They're pretty complicated and not safe kind of areas. They've got this idea, they've got the study that they've done 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 96% of disabled employees are rated as average or above average in safety, and it just got better to 97% in the latest study. Another report, 93% of employers stated they do not believe disabled workers create a safety risk. And then this was from Canada. So Brock University, I've never heard of before, but I found this. And so I think it's a Canadian lilt, but I think Canadians are quite similar to Americans and humans in general. Employees with disabilities have a 40% lower safety incident rate and 78% lower overall costs associated with accidents than their non-disabled peer employees. I'm like, wow, okay. But the big thing, and I think I've known this, but again, it just kind of reiterated for me, workman's comp, which everyone struggles with and says, oh my gosh, this is an issue, isn't related to having people with disabilities, right? It's related to your risk of your business, just in general, the size of your business and your company's health and safety record, right? So that's an important thing to know. It's like bringing somebody in with a disability isn't going to change your costs. It isn't. Now, if you find after several years that they've ruined your health and safety record, right, which is, could happen, then that's going to adjust it over the time, but it's not going to adjust them by hiring them, right? And so again, that barrier that people could have bring up, we want to kind of get that out of the way. I think that's important. And then the accommodations. So the big one that keeps coming up is the cost of accommodations. I'm like, I'm going to have to redo my whole office. I'm going to have to redo my whole space, right? And you've all probably seen this, but Jan has done repeated surveys, and 56% of the thousands employee survey they did said the accommodation needed by their employee cost absolutely nothing, right? And again, that's part of our role. Often we're doing a lot of the accommodations, whether it's by the coaching, whether it's by a picture schedule that we've put together, or other tools, or translation of complex instructions for the person. So it is part of the service that we provide, and it is often an accommodation. I don't know about you, and maybe people can throw into the chat here, where you've put an accommodation together and it's actually helped coworkers, right? So a lot of industries have people who maybe English is their second language, and so picture-based schedules, picture-based routines often really help the rest of the employees. So it's interesting that accommodations are definitely can kind of benefit going forward. So the other one was here, 39% experienced a one-time cost, and that one-time cost was $500, and a small percentage, 4%, had an ongoing cost. So yeah, there is some reality that some people may have an ongoing, incurring cost associated with it. The latest Jan study, and the book here, I've got the link in the bottom here, that's 89% of survey respondents stated accommodations help them retain employees. So again, back to that mutual interest, right? You want people to stay with you. You don't want turnover. How about you accommodate people, right? 72% reported employee productivity. Again, mutual interest. That's what we want for everyone. 56% noted increased employee attendance. And ironically, 38% had savings in workman's comp and insurance rates. So this accommodation thing is kind of real. It's kind of important. And again, I think where you've got an experience where it's not only for one particular individual who happens to have a disability, but it's also being used by other people. There's this great example, and we don't have a lot of manufacturing around us, but there's a manufacturing place in Baltimore that has just a number of individuals with very complex disabilities working at it. And it's, like a manufacturing place, it has danger, safety issues. Well, as they were bringing in individuals, and this one particular young lady who is blind, they were like, how is this going to work? How is she going to navigate around without getting hit, and so on and so forth? And it was designed by the people who are in the manufacturing place, not the employee provider, to create, different texture feeling on the floor. So the route to where she needed to get to her station, and the safe places and non-safe places, they created a different texture on the floor. That was created by the manufacturing individual, the employer. And so again, that co-creation, and that becomes something then other people can use, right? So they're thinking, they may not be visually impaired, but they're not thinking about it. They're looking at the phone, they're not concentrating, but if they're feeling something different in their floor, it gives them the feedback mechanism, again, helping safety and awareness. So, accommodations, I don't know, again, if people have got thoughts or ideas or of accommodations have been a barrier for people. I've not found it to be a barrier. For us, it is a conversation and it is a chance for education. And again, once we've put accommodations in, the employer like, oh, wow, that could be really useful. Let's talk about how we can make that bigger for the wider audience. And again, I often find once we get a little bit out of the way, those co-workers and other people at an employer's place are doing accommodations constantly because they're used to it, right? They're having to do it themselves. I think that's important. This is again a list, again curating some information about other myths. So turnover of people with disabilities is high. A couple of studies again that came from that Brock University report that talked about a Washington Mutual Customer Service Center that found a turnover rate of 8% of people with IDD versus the average of 45% in their call center. Marriott, again, same thing, had 6% turnover of people with disabilities versus 52% overall. This one's, I'll be honest with you, I'm not ecstatic about this, but the managing employees with disabilities is hard. There isn't a good report quantifiable because a lot of it's anecdotal information that's being shared. But I did come across this Harris report, and again, I haven't gotten to the source. It came from a different publication, but the Harris report that found 82% of managers said employees with disabilities were no harder to supervise than employees without disability. It's just ammunition, right? Again, I don't think employers are coming to say, okay, tell me where that statistics came from or the publication, but it's just information again for you. I think this is one that I don't know if employers would say this, but I think it's part of the why behind some of their decision making is firing an employee with a disability is hard. This myth of the ADA that we have to kind of bring down. The ADA is all about ensuring people are not discriminated against and are given reasonable accommodations, but that doesn't mean you can't fire somebody, right? And legitimately, why do you fire people, right? Unqualified candidates, right? And that's on us if we're bringing unqualified people to you. That's completely on us. But unqualified, if they're unable to do the job, even with or without a accommodation, that's not going to work, right? It's unrelated to the disability, the reason, the performance. They do not meet legitimate requirements of the job, which may be specific to that particular industry. And then if they pose a direct threat to health and safety of the workplace, you legitimately have that opportunity to fire someone. And not that we want to talk immediately to employers about firing people, but if that's something that's not an unspoken, then we'll never get to it, right? And so we sometimes have to kind of think through those issues. And maybe it's kind of coming at it from like, do you have any questions about the ADA and what that means to you and so on and so forth, and maybe coming at it in a different way around education. And I don't know if this is a thing, but I heard people talking about this idea that employees with disabilities can't fail. So I don't want them to fail. I don't want them to not meet the expectation. I don't want to fire them. And I think that is a piece of this whole understanding of the idea of dignity of risk, and that people with disabilities want to have lives like everybody else and they want to be treated equally. And that sometimes means you get not good outcomes out of it as well as good outcomes. And so I think that is just an educational piece that, again, often in an employer sales situation, you're not going to be able to tackle. But again, if you've got a deeper relationship where you can have a real honest conversation and you've got a rapport conversation with someone, you can talk about that, right? That idea that we do need to have individuals with disabilities getting fired and learning, oh my gosh, I've got to show up. I've got to be there. I've got to be able to do the performance that needs to be done, and then get ready for that next job and get ready for the next job after that. So I think those are just kind of some additional ones. And if anybody has other objections or myths that they're struggling with, put it into the chat. I don't have it addressed here, but that may be something we can do some research around as well. All right, so very quickly, we are at 11:35. Okay, very quickly, we've talked about the new ABCs of selling: attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. We've talked about this idea of focusing on the whys or the interests behind people's positions, maintaining that commitment to long-term relationship, and being tackling those objections head on. And then leveraging, and again, this is all these materials are going to be accessible to you, leveraging the research to sort of tackle those objections head on so we don't avoid them. All right, we are going to move. So that is the first through phases, right? We've connected, we've got people in through the consideration, and we've got them through conversion. Hopefully we've got people into jobs and we're ready to continue providing great service going forward. So this phase is the continuation phase, and it's about providing great supports. We are not going to talk about providing great supports here. There's a whole army of other experts who can talk about providing great employment supports following hire. But this is about that employer engagement and how to get that employer, deepen that relationship. Here are just some ideas. Celebration, very big thing, right? So making sure we celebrate those employers who get it, who believe it, who champion, to talk about the Accenture report, and making sure we recognize them in any way that we can, whether it's an event, whether it's our social media, wherever it may be, getting them up there and present. It's feel good, right? It's an emotional tie-in. It deepens that relationship, but it also is something that I think employers want, right? They want to be recognized for going out on a limb or taking a risk or doing something different. And they also want to be recognized as being inclusive, knowing that that's important to them. So we talked about the social media postings. We're going to the collaboratives. I know Kitty and I think Susan are here from the coalition. Collaboratives are very important for us to sort of keep deepening the relationships as an industry, not only as an individual agency, and inviting employers into what we do. The testimonials, you can't talk more about the testimonials that you get. You got more credibility when you have another employer talking to another employer in that same industry than anything that you can put out there. And then articles. So when you do have a relationship with an employer who may be a point of influence in a particular industry, if there's a way to start getting their industry influence, right? So an organization, Stakes Manufacturing, that we work with because a board member of ours is a CEO of the organization. He's actually now writing a book. He's got a blog and a podcast, and he's been going across the printing industry championing the idea of inclusion. So we are helping him, right? So we're throwing articles his way, we're giving him testimonials, we're helping him co-create the materials around that. And any one of you can do that once you've got those deep relationships. So we talked about this, start by recognizing employers. October, everyone knows what October is, National Disability Employment Awareness Month. It is a big time to go at this and get your champions on board, to recognize, to celebrate, for them to push out their celebration out to their networks and their conferences. If you don't know this, the Department of Labor's ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Policy, has free posters. You can get them in English and Spanish. You just need to go onto their website and order them. They usually come within a week, 10 days. And those are often good things to sort of go to your employers that you're working with. Do you mind posting this up? We're really celebrating it. And it gives you a chance to sort of, again, touch them. It gives you a chance to sort of celebrate them. And even hopefully a chance to sort of get invited in. Hey, we could do a lunch and learn. We could tell you more about what we're doing, deepening that relationship. And again, with your prospects, you can also do this too. And I find that medium and larger organizations are always looking for outside expertise and outside specialists to come in. So again, if you've got maybe a larger organization that you're working with as a prospect, pepper them at October. We can be there. We can do lunch and learns. We can talk to your affinity groups. We can talk to whoever it may be to sort of, again, make sort of a deeper rapport with that organization. And, you know, this was our first NDEAM event, which was 9 years ago. We're going to be celebrating our 10th breakfast coming up in October. And I think it was $500. So it's not a small amount, but you don't have to start there. If you've not done one of these before, start with bringing people to your office and just get Dunkin' Donuts and coffee. Or, you know, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can start small. You may find that you have an employer who's happy to host. It gets a chance for them to share what they do. So think creatively about how to do it, but please, please, please do it. We've talked about LinkedIn. Last time we talked about LinkedIn networking in the connection phase. We talked a lot about individual networking, but as an agency, you're also representing and marketing and out there. So if your agency doesn't have a LinkedIn page, it needs one. I put a circle around the figure 2,000 followers because I was surprised to learn that we had hit 2,000 followers. We were about 300 or 400 just a few years ago, and we've made a big push to sort of push this out, make sure our board members are part of this and following and liking, our employers as they come on get celebrated and recognized and liked and followed, and it just keeps, you know, domino effect of spreading out that aspect. So again, that's something as an agency, if you don't have one, let's get one moving forward. And I want to touch on this a little bit more deeply, the Business Advisory Council, because I know there was some interest based on some feedback after the first session around BACs. So people have different titles for what they're called, active employer councils, business advisory councils. We call ours a BAC. It's been in existence now for probably 7 or 8 years. We actually used one of the NDEAM events as a way to invite people in. And I think I mentioned this, the first time we did it, it was an utter failure. No one said boo. We didn't get anyone to accept the invite. The second time we did it, I think it was the nature of the event, the nature of who was at that NDEAM recognition, that we were able to kind of convince a handful of people to come in, and we got the ball rolling. And 2 months later, we started the group. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward group. It's a group of employers. Often I find that the smaller local medium-sized businesses want to be part of them because they're very much more community-oriented. They want to connect with other businesses. We happen to have CVS representative because they do have a workforce development group that is very connected with community providers, so they are representative. There's no reason to have big or small. It's just whoever you're connected with who support what you do and are champions. And the idea, it's networking, right? It's about them spreading the message, them bringing their resources in to help us with that awareness page. It's for them to help us with respect to kind of improve our marketing, our pitches, our LinkedIn pages. They give us feedback on all of these aspects. So we're very much more employer focused and figuring that piece out. And then they give us strategic feedback, how we can kind of do better about kind of awareness or working with specific chambers, and then industry connections and invites, right? So they might invite us to their local industry council or group that may be. Again, this will be in the resources, but just quickly, always when you start something, make sure you have a why. What is your why? And then what is the why of a potential member, right? So our why is pretty straightforward. We want jobs and we want people to give us jobs, right? But why would an employer want to be part of it? You really need to think through that aspect. And so networking with like-minded businesses. There are businesses out there that want to be as inclusive as possible and bring people with disabilities into the area, and they want to be part of a community that's doing that. So that actually is something that is a draw for many people. They want education and training to better themselves in this field. So that's an opportunity to bring people in. It's also for quite small businesses a chance for them to highlight who they are, get more awareness about their business. So selfishly, they get something out of it. And then I find that often the case is that people like to belong to community organizations as they're giving back, right? It's their feel good, it's their volunteering, and it is a piece sometimes they put on their LinkedIn or on their resumes that it's important to them. I'm like, okay, cool. If it makes you feel good, I feel good too, as long as you're meeting my mission. So make sure you have your why together as you form this group. And just very quickly, this is our mechanics. We meet every other month for about an hour, and I'm pretty good about keeping to an hour, which I'm generally not about any other meeting at all, but I want to respect their time. We were, when we first started meeting in person, and again, trying to go business by business, hosting them so people could showcase their stuff. Because of COVID, we got away from that. We've gone to virtual, and we've been very lazy. We've stayed virtual because it's convenient and easy for people. I think we're going to try and make sure there's a couple of in-person meetings along the way so we keep those relationships moving forward. And then we have a pretty simple agenda. There's an opportunity for any of the members to share and brag about what's going on, what they want, what's happening in their world. We have Job Seekers Come. It gives them a chance to present and share their resume. And this idea of awareness of people with disabilities doing many different things, many different experiences, again, opens people's mind. We talk about previous job seeker status and ways that the BAC can help. And it just becomes this community of support. So we did a panel for a chamber a couple of months ago, and I can just lean on any of these BAC members to come in and present, right? They're happy to do it. It gives a chance again to showcase their work and their business in a venue. So it's a great group to lean on for the work that we're doing. Shout out to Kitty and the coalition. This is, I was going to say this is kind of a modern thing, but the coalition's been around since 2010, and these other groups, the one in Cuyahoga County outside Cleveland and Nexus in St. Louis, have been going for a long time with respect to bringing employers and bringing providers together to think bigger, right? We're often in our corners doing our own thing. We meet an employer, they want to do something, we can't work out something with them, and we say bye-bye and we move on. If we start working collectively, there's going to be a better solution for employers and a better solution for the job seekers. And so I love these coalitions. Kitty and her team are doing great stuff. The Cuyahoga group is just amazing and huge. I know less about the Nexus group, but I hear they're doing some fantastic stuff. I've tried to start one here, and it's hard work. It's hard work to get like-minded people together and figure that out. And so we're starting slowly and making some mistakes and hopefully learning from the mistakes. But it's definitely something where you can gather together. So it's definitely worth kind of moving forward and will help the industry as a whole. So keep that up. All right, 11:48. we have some time for questions. I know one of the feedback was, yeah, there's no time for questions. So I'm leaving plenty of time for questions here. Again, you can probably come off mute or put it into the chat. And it could be a question about anything. It could be a question about today, question about July, June. I guess we did it in June as well. I am open for any questions that there may be. And if there aren't any, because you guys are all like so bored with me, I totally understand that. But I always like to have kind of real time, a little poll. So those of you who remember, there's a little QR code, put your camera on it, put in just a quick and dirty how you rate today's webinar. I would appreciate that. I know, Katie, you have some messaging you want to share with everybody too.
Yeah, you all can still unmute and ask questions or put them in the chat box because Steve has saved a bit of time for that. Chelsea Bocard will put a link in the chat box that will get sent out to people as well. Again, a longer evaluation, and then once you complete that, it will trigger your certificate so that you get your credit for being here. So thank you so much, Steve, on behalf of the Employment First Council and all of the various groups in Kentucky that we're really excited to bring you in, and to Neon and ODEP for sponsoring your time with us. It has been wonderful. I've heard so many good things, and I can listen to you for 2 hours. So thank you. It was great.
Well, it's been an honor for me. I do this work. I've done this work for many years, but to be honest with you, this gave me a chance to really sort of synthesize it, right? And put it into the framework is something I've been working with for a while, but then pulling all of this material into a thing. You guys have made me a better employer engagement, so I appreciate that. And all these resources are free for you guys to use. And again, you can link in with me, you can connect with me. I think that information will be on the PowerPoint that'll come out to you guys. Feel free to link in with me or ask me questions offline. Hopefully I'll get to Kentucky again sometime soon. I loved my time there last year, and hopefully get a chance to meet you guys in person. Okay.
Thank you so much. The PowerPoints and recordings are on the Employment First website. And once this recording is done and the captions are added, we'll post that and then make sure everybody has that link as well. So you can come back and reference all the good information in his slides. And thank you for being so generous to share all that with us.
No problem. Go out there and engage.
So the evaluation link is in the chat. Great information. Thank you. All right. If you have questions, stick around and chat. Otherwise, have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Steve.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.